This morning's public councillor briefing. We have got a number of things on this morning's agenda, but we'll start off with CCO Statement of Intent, of Expectation and Transfer Agreement documents, which are in the agenda for today. And Tim, I'll hand over to you to introduce the topic and lead the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Also, I'd like to welcome Mike and Simon from Simpson Grierson, who I believe are online. Can you hear us, chaps?
We're just getting online now.
Okay, we'll give them a few more minutes. I'll kick off and check back in on them in a second. So look, the purpose of the briefing today is to table the latest draft of the Statement of Expectations, which includes feedback from the workshop held on the 30th of July and initial comments from Selwyn Water Limited. And also an initial draft of the transfer agreement is also being presented for the first time, which forms the basis upon which all assets and liabilities associated with the provision of water and wastewater services will transfer to Selwyn Water Limited on the 20th of December. Both documents will come back to Council for decision on the 17th of September. I would also like to welcome Mike and Simon. Simon and Mike, can you hear us now?
Yes, thanks. Good morning.
Fantastic. Morning, guys. And they are here to answer any questions that we might have on either document. So, in terms of the Statement of Expectation, the document you have in front of you, it's been drafted by Mike and reflects the comments that have been provided by councillors at the workshop on the 30th of July and complies with water legislation as enacted. It looks to set out the expectations for Selwyn Water Limited for delivery, but also acknowledges that during the period the Statement of Expectation covers, Selwyn Water Limited and Selwyn District Council will be working through transition, and SDC may be required to provide reasonable assistance to Selwyn Water Limited if unexpected issues arise to help resolve those. It's the current intention that this Statement of Expectation would be in place until late next year, at which time it's proposed to be reviewed with the new council. So before I go any further, Mike, I might just ask if you have anything to add in regard to the Statement of Expectation, and it might also be helpful, Mike, if at this point you could give any update in regard to Bill 3, which was passed last week, which might support the discussion today.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tim. Look, I actually don't have too much more to add on the back of Tim's introduction here. The updated version of the draft Statement of Expectations was building on the discussion that we had at the workshop several weeks ago, where there was some interesting feedback received on what should and should not go into the first SOE. So I've reflected on that and worked with the team to produce this updated version, which I think is a simplified version of the first draft that was circulated to you near the start of this year, or around about April, May. And I think that's a positive because it's less difficult to work through. It's more clearly addressing the mandatory requirements in the legislation for what needs to go into a Statement of Expectation, but it does also pick up on several points that we think are worthwhile including from both the transitional perspective but also the relationship perspective, which seemed to be some of the key messages that were coming through from this group of elected members at the previous workshop. So here to answer any further questions and any issues that might need to be addressed through this draft. I'm more than happy to answer questions. On the second point, Tim, around where the legislation has landed, there have only been a couple of very minor tweaks to the legislation, which is now soon to be the Act, post the workshop that we presented earlier in the month. So there's not a lot to be gained by going through the legislation as it currently stands. There's no material change to the points at which Selwyn made a submission. We're now dealing with this framework as it's known. There have been, as I said at a workshop recently, a couple of amendments which are relatively significant for those that are continuing to deliver on an in-house business unit basis. But aside from that, those that are setting up the water organisation, there are some positive changes that will reduce additional process cost for Selwyn District in terms of its need to do long-term plan amendments to be able to fully give effect to the transfer of assets that will be required. So unless there's any specific questions, I'm more than happy to take those, but I'd suggest that's perhaps all the update we need on the legislative front.
That's great. Thank you, Mike. Sanders, we can do one or two things now. We can pause now for questions around the statement of expectation, or we can continue on to the transfer agreement.
Let's just do one document at a time, I think, and see if there's any particular questions or comments people have got. So firstly, on the statement of expectations, before we move on to the transfer, or anything that, if people have got general questions about the stuff that's been presented today that you'd like to be able to talk to, that will be helpful to have at the front end of the conversation too. Elizabeth.
Deborah was first, I think. Oh, okay. So can I just have some absolute clarity around the statement of intent, statement of expectations? Obviously, we're coming to election. There's a new council coming in. Can it be reviewed at any point, or do we have to wait for the time to come round? And what will that exact date be?
Sorry.
I can answer this one, Julie, rather than you flaring up. So there's only the legislation provides for only one statement of expectations at any one time, and so what we are talking about here is the first statement of expectations, which can be adopted, but there is no strict requirement that says only one can be adopted on every 3 yearly cycle. So that's why Tim has introduced this as the first statement of expectations, with the intention that the shareholders might look to review and update that statement of expectations in, say, 12 months' time or even 18 months' time, by which time the entity will be up and running. And there might be a need to look beyond the transitional focus and start to think more about the longer term business operation and strategy side, which could benefit from some further direction from the shareholder.
So there's absolutely, if something new comes to light, there's no provisions in the bill to prevent a new council from making amendments to the statement of expectations or bring it back to the table before within the next 12 months.
No, there's not. But what I would say is we are setting an entity up and we want to, not for a long period of time, and as we say, things change, give them some level of certainty under the conditions in which they're operating and what they're targeting, that they can build their strategy around. The reason and that's the reason we're recommending a 12 months review. It lets new councillors get their feet under the desk, understand our operations, understand how council operates, and gives just enough time to do that first phase of setup for the council.
Thank you.
I think just on that point as well, it needs to be recognised that the purpose of the statement of expectations is twofold. One is to set out the expectations that the council has around how Selwyn Water is going to work with key stakeholders, including itself as shareholder. The second aspect is that it's intended to inform and guide decisions and actions that will be taken by Selwyn Water, including how it goes about preparing its water services strategy. And that's why the legislation requires the statement of expectations to be delivered no less than 6 months before the first water services strategy is due. And so what we would suggest is that there is no amendments at a late last minute to the statement of expectations if it interferes with that 6-month lead-in time for the prep of the water services strategy, because it then creates a risk that the water services strategy won't be properly informed by the document that is intended to fulfil that role.
Thank you. Deborah.
Just want to take a step backwards. I did have the opportunity of listening to the Timaru debate that happened on the 12th of the emergency meeting that they had on the 12th of August between 11 and 1 p.m. And I note that Selwyn Water Limited formed part of that discussion. Just for clarity, some of the issues that came up in that discussion was an expectation, I'd like clarification of that DIA are looking at sustainable CCOs with a population of 200,000 K. And I just want to understand what is our level, if that's the DIA's expectations, because we're doing this and I understand we haven't had a response back whether our water plan's been accepted. That's the next question that came out of the debate. And the reason why I'm asking around the 200,000 K is that if the water plan could be rejected, then Selwyn Water Limited will need partners, may need partners, to actually meet that particular criteria of the population numbers. And the other is that we only have an interim constitution, and that it was quite clear from their councillors' understanding that we would need to revisit that constitution with the new council, and also that we cannot join partners without going out to further consultation with our community. That was what we went out with regards to our correspondence to our committee, to our community, with regards to other partners joining. So before we actually look at the letter of expectation, I'd like some clarification around Timaru's understanding of where Selwyn Water Limited actually fits within the greater region of local water done well.
Thanks, Deborah. We don't need to deal with Timaru's speculation because it was a conversation that didn't have us in the room to even talk to, but I can clarify some of the matters that you've raised this morning. Selwyn's Water Services Delivery Plan was the first one approved in the country. We had the Minister for Local Government come and announce that. We had quite a large group attend at the Pines Wastewater Treatment Plant for that announcement, and there was some good coverage in the media about that, and through that the Minister praised the work that Selwyn District Council has done. There have been, and others might want to talk about what DIA's stance is, but the previous Minister for Local Government has stood in front of groups of local government elected members and said that 200,000 people is something that they think is worth considering as a population, and so that isn't currently the size that Selwyn's at, and that hasn't been part of our consideration to get to where we are now, but that has been a part of the broader narrative around the need for change. And you're right, we have not had a conversation with our community about joining with anyone else, and the consultation was very clear. It was in-house or a standalone CCO. If there were to be any future conversation with other councils about a decision to join together, then that would need to go through community consultation with the Selwyn community. At the Constitution, I'll get Tim.
The Constitution isn't an interim Constitution, Councillor. It is a Constitution is in place. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
I think probably best for Simon to take this question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Simon.
Tim, so the one point to note around the Constitution is obviously it just contemplates a single shareholder at the moment. If, as part of consultation, if the intention was to bring on other councils as shareholders in Selwyn Water, then the Constitution would need to be updated to reflect the fact there's more than one council. There'd also need to be a shareholders agreement between the shareholding councils, as is the case for the other jointly owned water services organisations that are being developed across the country.
Mike, did you have any other comments on the broader piece, or any advice you understand from DIA about ultimate size, is with Deborah's question?
I think you've captured the point well. In terms of the messaging prior to Christmas, there was, as you say, a sector meeting where the former Minister of Local Government spoke to the ideal as being a population base of at least 200,000, I should say. What we are seeing in practice is a number of CCOs that are being established with significantly less in terms of a connection base. And over time, I think DIA has still signalled that they are very keen to see aggregation occurring. But this is first step on a journey towards water service delivery, I expect, rather than the final. And so you're right to say that through ongoing discussions with neighbouring councils or with other councils, there may be a desire, a collective desire to see a joined up version of the CCO be created, and in that case there will be a requirement for both or more councils to consult with their communities, and that is because in terms of the legislation there is a requirement to consult where a council is considering becoming a shareholder in a water organisation. So that would be, for example, another council seeking to work and join in with Selwyn Water. And for the council, as an existing shareholder, there would be a consultation on a change to the shareholding arrangements, which, as Simon had mentioned, would be to allow another entity to come in and be a shareholder in Selwyn Water.
Thanks, Mike. Lydia.
I'll go through them just as points. On 9E, we talk about our climate change targets set out in the long-term plan. And I was just wanting some clarity on that because we've revoked our climate change policy. So are we looking at supporting the emissions reduction plan that we have, or the new policy? What are we aligning to with that?
I think that was a deliberately broad phraseology, climate change targets, to try and capture the field in terms of any policy that the council may have. But if there is a better phrase to use there that more accurately captures and aligns with Selwyn District's intentions, then that could be dropped in.
Okay, cool. And then I note between 9 and 10, there is a part that is information required in half-yearly reports, so we might just have to change the numbering around to give that one a number. And my question on that was, Selwyn Water Limited will provide 6 monthly reporting to SDC. And throughout the document, it says reporting to SDC. And I just wanted to be clear, is that reporting with staff or is that reporting to us as elected member council?
The way in which the reporting occurs is for also discussions between the council and Selwyn Water. The legislation requires this information to be included in the statement of expectation, and how you then receive and consider that information will be for the council to determine. That list that sits in between 9 and 10, as you point out, there's a missing paragraph number or subclause number. That was intended to be the subject of some discussion. Where we left things at the previous workshop was there was a lack of clarity around what information might be considered beneficial for the council. And so this here is effectively a long list of examples of information that the council could require Selwyn Water to provide. Our expectation was that this briefing would be an opportunity to have a look at that list, but then the best approach would be for, I expect, Selwyn District Council to work with Selwyn Water to understand what is practically achievable and what is in fact likely to be of benefit to both sides through that half-yearly exercise.
Okay. The next one there is 12B. And so in here we have biannual meetings between Selwyn Water Limited Board and SDC. So again, it's just clarity around that. And I just wonder if we can reframe some wording in there that it is, I would prefer that it was quarterly Selwyn Water Limited Board and elected members or council, however that's interpreted, through the startup phase. I just think for the first 12 months that would be an appropriate space so that we're all on the same page about what is happening and, you know, co-sharing information and guidance around that. And it is 12D was my next one, around the early advice before Selwyn Water Limited considers making significant departure from the water services strategy. And I just wonder if we could reframe that to look at early notice departure from the water services strategy, maybe it could be council approval of changes within plus or minus 5% through that strategy.
I think one thing with the strategy, we can do the delivery plan. So the strategy doesn't require council approval at all. It requires us to just look at it.
Yeah.
So that's part of the nature, and Mike or Simon, please jump over me if I'm misrepresenting, but part of the nature of them being CCO and independent is the strategy is Selwyn Waters based on what we said in the expectations. If they depart from that, what they put in there, council has no approval right, so it is very much just a reporting. So we can add it in as a reporting, but probably not as an approval.
Yeah, that's, and noting that obviously Selwyn Water Limited are going to have comment on this statement of expectations, so I would be happy with that to be as a reporting mechanism back if they make departure from water services strategy. And it was really just about providing the space for communication between the two to be clear and transparent.
If I can just help here as well, from a legislative perspective, once the water services strategy is adopted by Selwyn Water, they are then expected to deliver on that water services strategy. And so this provision here was intended to recognise that there might be situations where Selwyn Water's departing from that water services strategy or wanting to depart from it. But depending on the nature of the departure, they may well have to complete an amendment to their water services strategy. There is a provision in the soon-to-be Act which provides for the amendment of the water services strategy, and it requires Selwyn Water to first consider the application of their significance and engagement policy. So they will need to consider the amendment and then determine whether or not it warrants some form of engagement. They will then need to take any further action to comply with that policy, but there's also a requirement to give written notice to the council as shareholder of the proposed amendment and allow the council the opportunity to provide comment in return on that proposed amendment. So there is already an inbuilt process around notice, and so this provision in the statement of expectations was intended to just provide a requirement for early advice on a potential departure or amendment, in addition to that statutory process step.
Okay, yeah, I personally think it's good to note it provides clarity from both parties about conversations and expectations from each other. That will do me, I think. Oh, I had brought up originally the conversation around having a community liaison group, and I see appropriate in there that it is consider the benefit of establishment in that. So I see it as a good middle ground to consider it and not necessarily forcing them to undertake something in their startup phase.
And just again to help on this front, I think that's the appropriate framing now, given that at least for the first period of Selwyn Water's existence, there's going to be a high degree of working between council and Selwyn Water. And I think once it gets up and running, there might be an opportunity for that community liaison group. But given the relationship that's going to be playing out over the next 12 to 18 months, it's perhaps adding further layers into the process that might not be needed. Yeah,
I agree. And I think that if it's there, it's considered, and in the next 12 months of operation after establishment phase, if it's there and recorded, maybe it's something that would be transferred over and not forgotten about or considered in the next statement of expectations. So thank you.
Thank you. Nicole, we'll come to you online.
Good morning. So thanks for this work. Just go through my questions. So just in the cover report to it, says on page 4, so with some changes that are on it, it's got that Selwyn Water will notify SDC immediately of any material events and provide a follow-up report within a month. How is that reflected in the water services in the actual statement of expectations? Is that saying compliant, is that basically compliance, or what is that referring to? Because I couldn't, unless I missed it, actually find material events as something written in that statement of expectations.
So yes, it's Keith here. We put that in there. We're in conversations with Selwyn Water about that particular item at the moment. We felt that, because this was feedback from the last workshop, that there was a concern from councillors that if there was some material or compliance issue, that we should know about it immediately rather than in the 1 month. So
Yes.
this comment is a live conversation between ourselves and Selwyn Water at the moment. We will make sure that whatever is agreed is reflected in the final draft of the SOE. But the intention following on from the workshop was that if something of such a material nature occurred, we didn't want to wait a month before we found out about it.
Yeah, and these are things that I've been bringing up and been banging on for some time, even like the situation that we've got at the moment, with how things are done. I definitely, I mean, if there's a breach of our consent, I would think that we need to be notified. That is like ASAP. I mean, it looks like in here, I think a month is too long to be waiting. So no, it's good to hear that that's still being considered, and hence why I asked my question.
So I think, Nicole, if I can give under, I think it's
Yep.
12E, it's so what we've contemplated in the SOE is that where they're aware of a breach before it happens, they'll aim to give us at least a month's notice before any compliance issues actually arise. So it's essentially saying, we expect you to be looking, and we expect you to be looking often and early. And as soon as you get even an indication that there is a potential for it, that's when you have to tell us.
Yeah. I'm not sure that that's quite, with having at least a 1 month's notice where possible and stuff but yeah. No, good, thank you. I'm just looking, because my other ones were about compliance. On it, on page 7, so talking about in 9A, the different things to consider, plans and stuff. It doesn't look like the One Water strategy is involved in that one. Is there a reason for that, or have I misread?
That's intended to just be an example of the strategies. So all our key strategies and long-term plans are expected under the clause, and the brackets are an example of, but if we can include One Water as an example of as well.
Well, I would think that would be an obvious one to have included. So with the half-yearly report, with the compliance thing again, so so that one is just a whole reporting on how they've gone. So it's actually not really notifying like breaches and stuff. That, I mean, theoretically, if there are material, we should have already been contacted that those things have happened. From what you have said, in my answer to
just to help with that. So 12E was intended to be a preemptive notice requirement, where if through Selwyn Water's operations, they become aware of the fact that they are running into compliance breach territory, they are required to give Selwyn at least 1 month's notice, the council, of those potential compliance issues, so that there is then the ability to have a discussion around what plans need to be put in place to address that, or to try and avoid or mitigate any compliance issue. The 6-monthly report, half-yearly report, is in D, to report on compliance or other consenting issues, and that will that was deliberately framed in that way to capture reporting on any non-compliance as well. But that works separately from 12E, which is the preemptive notice requirement.
Yep, thank you for that. No, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Megan.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. So, look, a number of it seems that we're all asking the same thing, but slightly differently, because we obviously have some particular need to understand a particular aspect of it. So I'm still going to flow through my questions because they're slightly different than what other people have asked. And one's on the Constitution, which I know is not what we're talking about today, but trying to understand how that lines up and when we're going to do things. The next is about partnership with councils, and then the third is about mana whenua input, because I have got some direct feedback from mana whenua. So if I start with the Constitution, I understand that the Constitution is real, it's live, it's the thing that has been agreed, but I also work backwards and go, but it was agreed with an intent to be reviewed in December. So when we're using the words like a interim constitution, it's because that was always the intent, that we were just putting a constitution in place so the company could be stood up on 1 July. And I just wanted to know, is there still the intent that in December the new council will have an opportunity to review that constitution and make it more specific?
My recollection of the direction that we were given by council was if council saw a need to review it in the first 12 months and the new council saw a need to review it, they would give us that direction and we will work to the direction of the new council.
Okay, that's essentially the same. The December point isn't, I think, critical. Then the next part is about partnering with other councils. So, look, I think that, so we have been given some information that there's discussions going on between Selwyn Water Limited and other councils at this point in time, and that did come as a little bit of a surprise to a number of the councillors here, and including me from a mana whenua perspective, and we had the opportunity to talk about that in a public excluded session last week. But I think the points that it's relevant to the statement of expectation. So clause 5, is it? Yeah, 5, just outlines the purpose. So the purpose is for delivery of drinking and wastewater services to the Selwyn district. And that seems to be really directive in clause 5. Yeah, then checking it down into clause, then down in 12D, it says if there's a change to the water services delivery plan to give early notice to council that there's a change. And I just wanted to know, would that include if we choose to deliver services into, or if, sorry, not us, but if Selwyn Water Limited chooses to deliver services to another district? That's my first question, but in answering it, also could you answer whether we should be making it more explicit, therefore, in clause 15 about focus during the establishment phase, which I am seeing is about 12 months, that we should be focusing only on delivering services to Selwyn district so that we can actually get it right here before we start to bolt on others, unless we're directed by the minister. Should we make it a bit clearer here if that's what councillors want?
I wonder if I might just take the lead on this quickly, Julie, if that's acceptable for you. There's probably a couple of issues that you've raised here that I just want to respond to quickly. The first is that this statement of expectations reflects the intended transfer of responsibilities that this council is making to Selwyn Water. And so we're talking drinking water and wastewater within Selwyn District, because that is the limit of the transfer that this council has given to Selwyn Water. So at the moment, that is the boundary within which Selwyn Water is to operate. If there is any potential for Selwyn Water or whatever a larger version of the CCO it might become to deliver outside, there is going to be a need for the shareholder council, this council, to authorise that to occur. And so, as your mayor pointed out earlier, there is future consultation required before the CCO can take in the services of other councils, and there will be a need for the transfer agreement to be entered into for the CCO to pick up those responsibilities. The only other way in which that could occur would be through a contract that Selwyn Water enters into with another council, but that would also involve some shareholder oversight and endorsement by this council. So I don't think there is any immediate risk of Selwyn Water looking to take on and agree to those arrangements on its own. It's limited, it can't do that. It will need to have this council's endorsement before doing so, and that may involve a further round of consultation.
And so is there a mechanism in here or the Constitution that requires that? So I'm not talking about a change in shareholding, because I understand that. For the second part that you put forward, which is a contract for service delivery rather than asset transfer, what's the legal mechanism that requires that to come back to this council for decision making?
The Constitution restricts Selwyn Water to only provide water services within the Selwyn region. It's the first provision in the Constitution. Any consideration of joint comes as only a exploring of options for reporting back to council.
Okay, so but put aside joint. So you're saying that you just can't pick up a contract to do something just outside of the district?
It would be outside the purpose for which the Constitution is set up. It says only Selwyn district.
Well, that's really helpful, actually, from my perspective, to understand that, because I think that takes away a level of anxiety that might have actually existed. And so from a mana whenua perspective, our real concern was to go, well, we want to really get it right here first, and including delivery for us. And if we started to go outside of that we were a bit concerned that maybe the things that we've secured, which is the wastewater and drinking water services for our marae, that might be somehow pushed aside. So that gives some certainty for that. The last part that I had was mana whenua feedback. So I wasn't able to take this version of this statement of expectation to mana whenua because I'd met with them. We got this on Friday. I'd met with them just before that. So it was our chair and CEO, and said to them what would they expect in the statement of expectation, and talk through a few things. The first thing was exactly what Nicole had raised, is that when we supported the establishment of the Water CCO, it was based on the One Water strategy being a key critical document that would be incorporated because it was co-designed and supported by us. So if it was able to be explicitly referenced, that would be really helpful from a mana whenua perspective. The second part is more around partnership, and then the bicultural strategy and cultural competency within the entity itself. So at this point in time, we have a partnership agreement between Taumu Tūrunaka and Selwyn District Council, and it incorporates a mechanism for having discussions through the mana to mana quarterly meetings and the chair to mayor relationship, and it's unclear how mana whenua will have those same mana to mana relationships with Selwyn Water Limited. And given its water and so important to mana whenua, we were hoping to see some type of mechanism in here so that it was enabling a very similar arrangement with the directors of Selwyn Water Limited. And I know that there's a line in here about partnership with iwi, but it's not explicit enough to actually enable a conversation. And I don't know if it is a statement of expectation or if there's any other way that we can incorporate that, but that would be a desire from mana whenua perspective, if it can be put in.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. We'll have a look at that. We believe we can do that.
Okay, thank you. And then on bicultural strategy and cultural competency, this council has picked up the bicultural strategy that really does talk about how to raise cultural competency in Selwyn District Council, but there's nothing that is expressly going across to Selwyn Water Limited. And when I read that paragraph on 9A about the strategies, and what Nicole raised around the One Water strategy. Maybe I'd actually misunderstood how it was reading, but 9A, specifically considering and engaging with SDC's long-term plans, infrastructure strategy and strategic growth-related plans. Well, the bicultural strategy is not a strategic growth-related plan. So should that be broader to actually say in all strategies of Selwyn?
Yeah, we can have a look at that too, Megan. It's a good point. Yeah.
And that was the majority of the feedback, just really seeking a way to be able to support Selwyn Water Limited, to have good cultural competency and understanding so that we can give aspirations to the Waiora One Water strategy. Thanks.
I think just to help on this particular point, paragraph 9 sits under a heading that reads alignment with existing SDC policy and urban growth strategies. Just so that everybody's clear, the reason for that is that one of the mandatory requirements, content requirements for a statement of expectations, is to include requirements relating to the council's resource management planning and land use planning that is relevant to the relevant service area. So what we have intended through this section is to reference strategic planning and decision making around urban growth in particular and land use planning. I think the matter that you're talking about here around the One Water strategy is related to it, but it's also slightly separate to the extent that it involves a key stakeholder relationship with Mana Whenua. So I wonder whether that should probably sit somewhere else, perhaps in the working with Selwyn District Council section and key stakeholders. But as Tim noted, it's probably best that officers reflect on where that should be located, and it can be appropriately referenced in due course.
Thank you. And Sophie.
Kia ora, everybody. Thank you very much for bringing this back to us. It's always interesting because this is one of the things that it's not really that we're reviewing something that we've ever had before. This is creating something completely new, but guided by a lot of legislation. So, yeah. I definitely appreciate the paragraphs around the development of significant engagement policy and relationships with stakeholders, and also think the one I think it's in 15 about development contributions, so that's all really good. So my questions though, so in number 6, it looks great. I'm worried that there's a couple of things. So I do still have, personally at least, some concerns about the environmental standards that we don't actually have yet. So, for instance, I'm worried that the wastewater standards, because they'll be standardised across the country, and they have, you know, it's indicated that they've got some different levels, but they may not actually be appropriate to some of our environments, depending on how things develop. And I'm just wondering if we can add something in there about it being appropriate to the receiving environment, for instance, just because that might give us a bit of an edge in terms of if the standard is too low and we end up causing environmental harm because we're meeting the standards, which is, you know, meeting the legislation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's appropriate. And in terms of the drinking water quality standards, am I right in thinking that small and medium supplies have slightly different standards to large supplies?
I'd have to check, Sophie. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, because if that was the case, I was trying to find out on Te Mata Aroa's site the other day. It would be interesting to consider whether we'd like to be clear about intending to provide the same drinking water quality to all connections, including the ones that might fall under a slightly different set of standards, because I don't actually want to go to a smaller township and say, you're not getting quite the same quality as, say, Lincoln or Rolleston because you're about 500 people. Sorry, guys. Okay. All good there? Right. The next one I've heard, we've been talking about in number 8, a wee bit of concern around if we were going to start partnering or joining with other councils. one of the other paragraphs has something about the fact that Selwyn Water Limited would be subject to Lagoima requests, and it's got it in little brackets noting that. I'm just wondering whether under 8, is it worth putting in little brackets noting that under the Constitution, these are the steps that would need to be followed. Just because if we've got people who are reading the Statement of Expectations without realising it has to be paired up with the Constitution, which, as you said, is quite clear about what and how that would need to happen, just having it there, basically.
No issue with it. Yep.
Okay.
Take that on board. Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks. Going to echo a few other comments around paragraph or section 9. The one with that. Just saying, let me find it. 9E, as Lydia mentioned, around climate change targets and various policies. Yes, it would be good to have some wording that reflects the policies that we actually have or that are in development. Not sure what the best wording is there, but there is a lot of work going on there, and I don't really want us to, even if it's potentially going to get changed in 12 to 18 months, you know, whatever it is that the titles of the policies that the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee have been reviewing and that sort of thing, you know, it would be good to have that in there, not just the 2024 long-term plan. In the unnumbered section that has the potential optional things for Selwyn Water to report on, to be honest, looking at them, I feel like with this being a brand new thing that nobody quite knows how it's going to work, they all seem appropriate. But if there's a sequence of meetings over the first 12 to 18 months, perhaps there could be a schedule of which ones are reported on when, rather than saying we need this every single time, because some of them may not be appropriate immediately. So I don't know how that gets worded, but just as throwing it out there as a bit of maybe that's a way of mitigating our intense desire for information, which I'm pretty sure is going to carry through to the new council and also to the general public. Everybody is going to want to know all the things. Yep. In paragraph 11, it refers to paragraph 8. I think it might be needing to refer to paragraph 9. Because it's talking about policy intentions. That's on paragraph 9.
Okay.
That's a little pernickety one. Going to support Lydia regarding quarterly reporting. In the transition phase, I think quarterly would be good. We're going to get hammered for lots of information and requests to know how things are going. So easier to plan it now than to, yeah. And my last question has already been answered, so I'll pull that back from that one. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Was there any response to those? You should have answered those on the way through, but
Yeah, I think so. No, we've picked up that. Thanks, Sophie.
thank you. Deborah.
Thank you. I've got just a simple one. In the Constitution, you say it's only written for Selwyn. But then I look at the Taitapu sewage agreement that we actually have with Christchurch City, because their sewage goes to Christchurch City. And I brought this up before. We also have agreements with Christchurch City for the management in time of, say, an environmental risk, of actually transferring our sewage or their sewage to either one of our sewage systems. And I just want to understand, given the complexity of that relationship, and I don't want to disconnect it because it's a very, very important environmental stopgap measure for both Christchurch City and ourselves in managing any severe environmental effects. I just wonder where that sits within our Constitution, and do we actually need to put in another clause that actually recognises this partnership that we do have with Christchurch City Council, and how we expect it to be retained between Selwyn Water and Christchurch City Council, who have chosen to go in-house. I'd like some information around that, please, with regards to our letter of expectation.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Councillor. Look at 2.1. Look, 2.1 of the Constitution is clear that as long as those services are to provide service to the district, so the fact that we're sending sewage to Christchurch City is neither here nor there. So as long as the services are specifically related to providing a service to Selwyn District, and that's outlined in 2.1 of the Constitution. Simon, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that's accords with my view as well, Tim. Ultimately, all the arrangements that are currently in place that the council has will all transfer over to Selwyn Water to take charge of and to manage and operate. And I would regard these arrangements with Christchurch as being arrangements relating to water and wastewater services within the Selwyn district.
Thank you. Grant.
As one who voted against the establishment of a WISCO, I'm sort of, it's ironic the conversation we're having, that we appear to be in the micro rather than the macro. We're trying to tie this new entity almost down so tight that we might as well have kept the office down the hallway here. My understanding of the discussion that was had was that we formed a WISCO because we felt it was going to drive long-term value around the best delivery of services for our Selwyn ratepayers. One of those things is to have scale where you can distribute the costs, the management cost over a wider cost base. And I think if we sit here tying this entity up so tight, those opportunities will evaporate and we'll be stuck here with a WISCO, which in all intents and purposes is the same services that we had down the hall with another level of cost attached. And I am really concerned. I listened to the Timaru discussion. It was very straightforward. It was very commercial, and offered opportunities for us to be involved if it was acceptable, particularly if we maintain differential pricing, which seemed to be everyone saying in the short term differential pricing is required to join up. My own personal view in the long term is that harmonisation is the only way to go, but that's for a later date. But I really wonder whether we're screwing this company down so tight it won't be any use to anyone. And I really caution against that, because this refer back and this desire to have further consultation and all those things that are going to take time will drive potential partners into other people's arms, and we'll be sitting here with no one. So I'll leave that thought with you. But another thing that I wanted, and I'm not sure where it will go, but there is an obvious tension in the fact that Selwyn District Council will be the owner of two entities, being Selwyn Water Limited and Cord, which will have different priorities, and there potentially could be disputes between all three of us. One as a contractor or two to SWL. Us as an owner wanting good dividends from both, or not one from one anyway. There doesn't seem to be any where within the documents where it addresses disputes. How do we manage disputes? Where do we do it? What's the process? And I think that'd be valuable to have somewhere within there that you do think ahead and think, if we do have a conflict of interest, who wins? Is it profitability or delivery of services? Where are the disputes managed?
We have a number of groups set up at the moment, Councillor. We have an operational group where I meet with Alex regularly. There's escalation to a strategic group where Sharon and Murray sit, and then ultimately escalation to this governance group. So that's what's in place at the moment, and will be for the coming year as we transition across.
Turn this off. Thank you for the indulgence. I get that. That's informal, but I think a formalised process is always better than informal, because when the S hits the fan, as proverbial, generally the informal processes get forgotten quite quickly.
Would a development of, if we were to include something that said a commitment that we'll develop a relationship protocol between the entities, be satisfactory?
Look, I'll leave it in your hands how you do it, but I just think if you ignore that, you're likely, sometime in the life of those three companies, as an owner, as a contractor, and as a deliverer of services, you're going to have some tension.
Thanks, Grant. We'll have a look at that and bring it back on the 19th.
Thank you. Shane.
So,
Te whare uti nei, tēnā koe. Kei te wiritanga o te kaihui o te waka, tēnā koe. Kia ora tātou. I'm in agreement with Grant, actually. I think we've made a decision now, and as governors, we need to follow the four pillars of good governance and continue without any extra layers. Your staff have put in the work. Thanks, Mike. I've just got one question in F, whatever, the 15F, and wonder if it should be more explicit or directive. SWL framework for SWL that it will aim to recover 100% of SWL's growth from developers. I think it's great to have that clause in there. I wonder if it should be more directive to say, or put them under the pump a little bit. I think it's not too hard to calculate the growth costs now, and put some tighter framework around it so that that growth is covered 100% by the growth of the developers.
That's something that we'll take on board. I do think from current experience and practice across development contributions is that recovery of 100% is aspirational at certain points in time because of the shared benefit that is realised from new water assets, but we'll take that on board. The other thing to note is that the government is working on a new development levy framework and regime with the intention that that will be introduced at some point later this year. Now, development levies are intended to provide for the recovery of what's called aggregate growth costs, which will be intended to be more than the current development contributions framework provides for. And it's been pretty well socialised that the development levy regime they're working on will replace development contributions for both councils and for new water organisations. So I think for now, this is effectively a holding clause in the statement of expectations, because when this new levy regime is available, everyone will be required to pivot, or if not required, will most likely want to. So I think for now, this is the starting point. And then we might find that Selwyn Water, won't in fact need to jump early with DCs. It might be best to in fact go for development levies. So we'll take that on board, but I just wanted to make sure that you're clear in what's happening in the future with reform in this space.
Thank you. Just note that Clause 8 does talk about the opportunity to explore future opportunities to achieve the greater efficiency that's kind of been discussed, and that while we're not going to enter into contracts or join up without a big shareholder conversation, there is the need for that research and understanding that others are going through transition over the next 12 months, and we can't be hands off and not know any info about that. So that is captured there. There are a couple of other bits that I just noticed, particularly the one that should maybe rename numbered 9, if it was meant to be number 9F, for the first 12 months of operation progress with transition planning. This is about half-yearly reporting, and I'm wondering if that's about transition implementation rather than still planning, if we're involved in the first, if we've already handed over beyond the planning of transition phase. I also had that 12E that has been brought up a fair bit around what did we really intend to mean by at least 1 month's notice, and I think you've tried to provide some clarity, but I don't feel like the words that are really written there, with so many of us questioning what that intent was, maybe just needs to be clarified a wee bit more. And 14C currently says maintain strong, independent and implement best practice approaches to the governance and operation of its business, and to me that sentence just didn't quite make sense. I wasn't sure what the independent something and implement best practice. I don't understand what that was, so if you could either explain or clarify, it might just need an and, or I'm not quite sure what sits in there. And lastly, it's on the points that Megan raised. I wonder whether there needs to be a new heading or a sub-part to this, which is about mana whenua partnership, and that stands that out as it's more than just another stakeholder relationship, and there's something that's been important about us and our culture and our partnership up till now, and that ethos needs to be continued with the new entity. And it's not just because there's fulfilling obligations, it's actually because of our experience and knowing that we have richer discussions, providing faster processes with cheaper outcomes for our community by going through a partnership process. It's the heartbeat of why we're doing this, not just to meet some obligation. And I don't know what the heading should be in as a title, but I just wonder whether actually having that as a separate thing highlights the importance to us of Selwyn Water Limited operating with that culture.
Thanks, Sam. All those points are noted. Mike, are you able to expand on Sam's question relating to 14C at all?
I think Sam has quite rightly picked up a drafting issue, so we'll take that one on board, I think, is the only response needed there. But the intention was to reflect a requirement or expectation to maintain strong independent governance, but implement best practice approaches to the way they operate the business. So that just probably needs to come through with more clarity.
Thank you. Any further comments on this part of on this document, and then we will move on to the next piece? Is there any further comments, Mike, you want to make on this document before we ask Tim to lead the next part?
No, I think that's been a really helpful conversation. So thank you all for engaging in the content. It's been very useful.
Sorry, there's one other question in the room. Grant.
I support Clause 8. I just wonder, given the conversation we had, it does sound like the pathway is quite clear for partnerships or contracting. Can we develop a matrix as an appendix of what it actually looks like if someone does approach us? What are the steps they have to go through? It does seem we know what they are, don't we? We just haven't explicitly put them in a matrix and said, this is what you need to do if you either want to be our Selwyn Water to contract provide services for you or become into the partnership. What is the process?
And that might be part of what the conversation that Timaru was trying to have was what would the pathway and clarification be. So I think having that level is helpful. Yes. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so move on to the transfer agreement. Okay, so by way of introduction to the document, the transfer agreement sets out the general approach to transferring all assets, liabilities, rights and obligations relating to drinking and wastewater delivery to Selwyn Water Limited. The document contains several schedules that detail the assets and liabilities to be transferred and is in the process of being completed prior to the 17th of September council meeting. Every effort will be made to ensure all assets and liabilities are captured in these comprehensive schedules, but recognising we may not capture everything for the 17th of September meeting, the transfer agreement allows for the addition of further items post-transfer, if anything not already transferred is identified, as well as the ability for Selwyn District Council to hold items on trust while transfer conditions are satisfied. To ensure a successful transition, the transfer agreement anticipates the parties working together during the transition period to give effect to Selwyn Water Limited, assuming its role as the WISCO. This is a complex process. There is no blueprint, and Selwyn District Council are the first in the country to do this, and we intend to work collaboratively with Selwyn Water Limited to ensure we set Selwyn Water Limited up for success. As the sole shareholder of the WISCO, Selwyn District Council will provide governance and support as set out in the Statement of Expectation and Transfer Agreement to facilitate a successful transition and continued provision of water services. It has also been recommended by Simpson Grierson that Selwyn District Council provide a letter of support outside the transfer agreement to Selwyn Water Limited, which notes, if anything unexpected arises and Selwyn Water Limited hasn't been able, through its own best efforts to resolve, Selwyn District Council will work with Selwyn Water Limited to provide support to resolve. This reflects the collaborative intent and desire to set Selwyn Water Limited up for success. Simon, is there anything you want to add to that before I pass back to Sam for discussion?
Thanks, Tim. Look, I think the one key thing just to note, which is covered by the paper that's been circulated, is that all of the responsibilities for water and wastewater services will transition to Selwyn Water. That means they need to be comfortable, they have all the assets and all the contracts and everything else transferred effectively across to them so that they can effectively carry out those obligations. What is clear is that there is a myriad of assets, arrangements, etc., that are currently sitting inside council, and we are including a process in the transfer agreement that's being referred to ensure that if things haven't been formally transferred across on the transfer date in December this year, subsequent to that, those items will transfer across. There'll be a process for that, and ultimately it's all about giving comfort to the independent directors who are coming in to run Selwyn Water, that they will have the ability to take over and perform those obligations. So that's, I think it's just important that it will be a clean break from the perspective of the council, but also the council will be supporting Selwyn Water to ensure they can carry out those obligations effectively and consistently with the way in which those obligations have been carried out by council previously.
Thanks, Simon. Sam, I'll hand back to
Great.
you for questions.
Thank you. So on the transfer agreement, does anyone have any questions that they've got or comments that they'd like to make about the intended process? Elizabeth.
So obviously in your last comment, Simon, you talked about a clean break from SDC. The question that I have is, I just want to use this as an example. So chlorination has obviously been a huge topic for our community for the last number of years. Something like that is a clean break. Obviously, we're not getting into the nitty-gritty in a statement of intent about the decisions around those kind of opportunities. We know that Christchurch City Council at the moment are exploring water exemptions, but they're remaining in-house, so that's easier for them to do so. How would a decision like that function with the kind of new formed relationship and the clean break prospect between Selwyn Water Limited and SDC, if the community is wanting us to now take on and explore in a similar vein to Christchurch?
Well, look, I think that would be part of direction that this council would give, probably as part of the statement of expectation, if we were going to look at that, Councillor. Simon, anything to add to that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there will be regular engagement with the directors of Selwyn Water, as we've already touched on. I think it will be important for council through those interactions with the independent directors to provide them with feedback around what the community is looking at. But to be fair, Selwyn Water has the overall responsibility and obligation for carrying out services, and as part of its strategy, it will be looking at all of these things itself and making proactive decisions. So ultimately, they will be the entity that will be responsible for these things, and Selwyn will have a role as the shareholder to ensure that those things are taken into account as the directors are setting and revising that strategy over time.
Simon, could I just ask you to comment, please, on kind of when we talk about, and this goes to what Councillor Miller raised earlier, is the level that we go down to, because what we are dealing here is a commercial entity, right? And then you start, depending on the level of direction, the risk around deemed directors and that sort of stuff. Would you mind briefly touching on that for councillors?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognise that the council is a shareholder, and through the statement of expectations and interactions with the independent directors of Selwyn Water, it can give some guidance, but ultimately it is up to those directors to make decisions for Selwyn Water as an organisation. And obviously Selwyn Water itself as a water services organisation is bound by a number of pieces of legislation and regulations and other things that it has to comply with. So those are the things that those independent directors need to deal with. Ultimately, governance and operational matters, which are not things for the council to step in and attempt to direct the board on. It is ultimately a board decision for the Selwyn Water Board.
Thank you. Grant.
The schedules are not filled in yet with the assets. They're going to be transferred, but the specific ones I wanted to talk about was understanding what level of strategic oversight you've put into the land parcels. I'm thinking particularly of the Pines disposal area, the Ellesmere disposal area, Rayburn Farm, is it in or out? Help it land parcels, are they in or out? because potentially those land have future strategic value and you wouldn't want to transfer them out of STC. You might want to keep them and just lease them, for instance.
There is a strategic issue for consideration. So we've mapped all our land parcels. I might ask Mike or Simon to flag what's come into the new version of the bill, which is access rights for Selwyn Water to land on which water assets are owned, which gives us greater latitude to decide and it is a decision, do we want to maintain the land? Do we want to transfer? What do we want to lease? And we could rely on access rights for Selwyn Water for everything. So there's a strategic decision there gone. Do we actually keep all the land on our books? Do we transfer some and others, to your point, yes. Do you want to add anything, Mike or Simon, on that?
I think the original position under the original bill was we had anticipated that freehold land that held water assets would need to transfer to Selwyn Water. That's now not the case, and as Julie has indicated, Selwyn Water could rely on access rights and other arrangements that wouldn't necessitate the transfer of ownership of the land. So as Julie says, ultimately it becomes a strategic question for council as to which land it might make sense to transfer to Selwyn Water and which land it makes sense for the council to retain for a number of reasons, which might include future other uses by council.
So just to follow up on that question then, at what point do we have that discussion ahead of just transferring it?
The intent is to bring a recommendation, our position, to the meeting on the 17th of September.
And would you like some discussion today about the parcels of land that you've raised, Grant, I think are the obvious ones. There might be some others that you also have identified as staff that you think need some consideration. It'd be, I don't know, just maybe if other councillors have some views on the way that we deal with that might just help inform staff in thinking about drafting that next paper. Okay. Lydia.
Mine is, I had a question around plant and equipment and in the assets part, and just noting the spare parts, items held, etc., and noting that Selwyn Water Limited isn't the delivery arm. Who holds those assets? Selwyn Water will hold them on the books, but someone else or the contractor will physically.
So where there's an asset that's used for the provision of those water services that's currently held by Selwyn District Council, those will transfer, including all the manuals, the spares and everything that they need with them, because they're going to need to be able to maintain and service those pieces of equipment. So the intention is everything will go across. I think you just identified part of the complexity of what these schedules really look like, because the plant itself is easy to identify, but where the spares and the manuals are held is a more detailed exercise for us.
Yeah, I understand that. And I guess some of the guidance I had or wanted to give was around 5.9, so the post-closing review, and sort of I see that as the wash-up period, and not lawyer speak. And I'm just looking at the schedules, and I guess it's really hard because we're not seeing everything listed in the schedules yet, and I understand that you have a really big piece of work to undertake to list all of those. And I just wanted to take some comfort that changes in those of what we are transferring with this agreement and things that might come to light through or after the period will be reported back to us at council. And so I just want to take some comfort that we will list the things that will be transferred, and items that are found in between times will be reported back to us.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor. I mean, this is a big piece of work, as you've said, and look, we don't think we're going to get it 100% right. There's going to be a few things that we think we're going to need to mop up, and they'll absolutely be brought back to this council.
Okay, and then just the last one was just a little bit of clarification for me, and that was, sorry, I'll just find my other page. It was around amendment to this agreement, and it says that both parties need to agree, which is great, and I was just wondering, the delegation for that agreement is with yourself, Chief Executive,
Simon, did you have an intent with that statement around delegation?
Sorry, we're just talking about the general clause to amend, is that right? The amendment clause in the agreement, as opposed to specifically delegations.
Is that right, Lydia?
Sorry, bear with us again. So it was point 15, point 15, point 11, amendment. It says, except as provided. No amendment to this agreement will be effective unless it is in writing and signed by each party. I just wanted to know where the delegation sits for signing off each party.
So there've been, if council hasn't delegated amendment to this to CE, it will have to come back to full council.
I should just note there, we anticipate the final version of the transfer agreement that will be provided for the 17th meeting for approval will include essentially an automatic process for updating the schedules to reflect the items that have been identified as needing to transfer across. That those updates, as Tim has already indicated, will be brought to council for information purposes, but we don't anticipate that that will be a further approval step per se, because this is just giving a process for giving effect to the intention under the transfer agreement and ultimately the Water Services Act to ensure that all the correct assets being, and liabilities and obligations being transferred across.
Thank you. Sophie.
Oh, sorry, I thought Elizabeth had hers on. For, okay. Just with regard to the list that Grant was mentioning, I was originally going to ask about things like stranded assets and stuff, but if there's lists coming, I'm guessing that this has been mapped out really well. But I just wanted to add, I think it would be appropriate if that was circulated as soon as possible, because honestly I know that obviously the 17th of September is the last meeting, and if there's potentially, there are things that if we don't finalise them on that date, there's problems. So if there's a chance to see the list early and maybe even find some time on the 3rd or the 10th to just talk about it briefly, that would be great, because this is actually quite a big deal.
Thanks, Councillor. It's noted. It's a big piece of work. We'll do our best to get it to you as soon as we can.
Thank you. Deborah.
Just two questions. When we're coming back with leasehold land, what is the most cost effective for our ratepayers with regards to those holding costs? So it would be really good to understand, are they better held by council and leased or transferred, or are they better transferred across to Selwyn Water Limited? Which is the most cost effective for the consumer? What's the bottom line? So I'd like that to come back in a report just to understand the management of that system. The other, I've got a question, and sorry, I might have overlooked it, but I guess it's where, and I've got it under other property rights as a definition, where do we sit with regards to those developers around our policy of point strips, the ownership, where we have two developers and we need to both connect the services between the two developers. Now, we do have a policy, but I'm just wondering, are those policies transferred across to Selwyn Water Limited, or are we going to manage those policies under our planning, resource management, and then are we going to somehow transfer those at some later date as assets? How's that going to work with regards to the transfer of those assets held, being asked to be placed in by the developer for water and sewage connections?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Dom, are you able to shed any light on that question?
Both of them?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so if we talk to leasehold,
Come over here.
sorry.
Good morning. So if we talk to leasehold property first, at the last check, there's no leasehold property that's going to be impacted by this. So we haven't had to undertake an assessment on that. And in respect of point strips, we'll work through them, but because that infrastructure relates not just to water, and because we hold each one for a period in accordance with our policy, it's likely that that will continue to be held by SDC at this point.
Thank you. I guess I don't know if it's part of the question, but it feels like it's a flow on from that, is around the financial sustainability of the new entity, and the borrowing that they're going to take on is against the income from the water charges. But is there any impact of them either owning or not owning the particular land that's associated with the processes that they have to carry out, whether that's delivery of drinking water or the treatment of wastewater? Has that been? Does that come into the calculation too?
Yes, Simon, I'll throw a little bit to you, but we have another set of specialists at Simpson Grierson who've been looking into the property for us. So we have a full set of advice, and we've gone down on a list by list basis. Please correct me if I'm misrepresenting this, Simon. There is no impediment we could see with not transferring anything at this time, and that's not to say we would never transfer land. That might be an option that council wants to consider as to whether that is something actually we go, let's hold the land for now and let's come back and consider that 12 months down the track, or 6 months or 18 months down the track once we have once we're through establishment. That is an option. But there isn't anything that we have identified, given these new provisions in the bill, that would stymie Selwyn Water from operating. Simon, do you want to add in?
Yeah, and perhaps just picking up on the Mayor's point, ultimately the assets that are being transferred across aren't being used as security by Selwyn Water for their lending. The lending is secured over the water services revenues that will be generated, and therefore the fact that they will or won't own these freehold properties that might be worth quite a bit of money won't affect their underlying ability to obtain lending from the LGFA.
Cool. Thank you for clarifying that. Sorry, Sharon, do you have?
No, I'll add it at the end.
Okay. Shane.
Yes, I heard there was a chocolate fish going, so page 18. You might want to put the letter T after stormwater assets. And
we always put two mistakes in our documents.
Council, well, I think when I first started, maybe councillors or councils used to have a whakatauki, and it was leave some meat on the bone. So in support of what Grant has put forward around land holdings of value, and maybe it's easier just to put a number on it rather than get a huge list of assets. Maybe it's any land value holding over $1 million or something like that is still valuable to council, that it be part of an easement for Selwyn Water Limited would be my 2 cents there, but yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Shane. Grant.
I'm looking at clauses 3.3 and 3.4 around the apportionment statement, and it appears in 3.3 that the council prepares an apportionment statement and gives it to Selwyn Water Limited for agreement. But then 3.4 seems to say the reverse, that Selwyn Water is going to provide the apportionment statement to the Selwyn District Council. Is that correct?
Simon, I'll ask you to comment on that if that's okay.
Yeah, look, let me just take that one away. It might just be just opening up the document in front of me now, but
have a look at it perhaps and come back. But yeah. I've got something else to talk about. I think the larger issue that I'm concerned about, which is fundamental to this, is what is the valuation number? Has it been peer reviewed? Are we required as governors to approve that valuation number? What does a pre and post balance sheet look like? Has it been peer reviewed? Because this is fundamental, isn't it?
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I have a response from Alison. Unfortunately, she can't be here today. She's unwell. But the dollar value of the assets being transferred is still being finalised. So we expect to have that final value understood and communicated as part of the 17th September meeting.
sort of trying to bat both sides of the equation here, because there is some risk to Selwyn Water taking unknown environmental risks. So I'm assuming there's some sort of provisional valuation being done, or some valuer is going to provide some detail about what the valuation. Right, from my point of view, I'd like to see the number as high as possible to get it off the STC balance sheet. But from the Selwyn Water side, we also got to play. So you can give me some confidence that I should expect that on that date.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alison and the team are working through the recent valuations as of the June the 30th.
Elizabeth.
Just a couple of questions. The first one is, so as we transfer over the LGFA loans, you guys take them on as is, so the contracts are exactly the same with fixed interest rates and the same terms and conditions? Is it a simple yes or no?
Yeah, no, that's right, Councillor. The contracts are the same.
Okay. So is a question for the lawyers. So a little bit following on slightly from what Grant was talking about, the indemnity by council. So the council will indemnify Selwyn Water from and against all losses suffered or incurred by Selwyn Water in respect to non-performance, defective or negligent performance. Just that one, 8.3 and 8.4, if you can just explain to me what that means in layman's terms, and if things do go horribly wrong, then who's picking up the tab on this, and where does the buck stop in terms of those kind of responsibilities? Because obviously it's a bit of a, like Leaky Homes is a great example, isn't it?
Thanks, Councillor.
So this is in relation to the contractual arrangements that are being transferred from council to Selwyn Water. And clauses 8.3 and 8.4. The 8.3 provides that council indemnifies Selwyn Water for essentially non-performance under those contracts prior to the transfer date. So if there's something that should have been done prior to, should have been done prior to the transfer date and wasn't done by council, then council will be responsible for that. And similarly, following the transfer date, if there's something that should be done by Selwyn Water and isn't done, then council's not going to have liability for that. So the intention of this clause really is to draw a line that says everything that happens before the transfer date is the responsibility of council under these contracts, and everything that happens after the transfer date is the responsibility of Selwyn Water. Now, ultimately, in practice, I think most of this will be covered by wash-up arrangements. But if there was something, a fundamental problem where, and just to use a simple example, if council hadn't paid a contractor under a contract for work that was done prior to closing, well then it should be reimbursing Selwyn Water for that if Selwyn Water pays that bill post-closing.
Thank you. Can I just check Julie, your answer before talked about not necessarily needing to transfer. The land is what you were specifically referring to. So we do have to go through a transfer process for lots of other things, but it was specifically the land piece.
Yes, correct. Apologies if I wasn't clear.
That's okay. Can you just explain what sort of advice you might be bringing to the September meeting, given if there are uncertainties around those parts of transfer as to whether or not it's needed to either support the new entity to be successful, or whether there's other considerations that we might take a different view?
Absolutely, we can bring full, as it's a decision meeting, excuse me for stumbling on my words, we will bring a full options analysis. So where it is required, we'll set that out, and where there are options for council to make a decision, we'll bring a recommended approach and analysis of other options as ordinary course.
Cool, because it sort of seems that there's a few pieces of land that might have been initially purchased for some plan 20 years ago that now no longer are required for that. And council might have other uses or considerations for it. And then there are other large bits of land that are only needed at the moment because of current treatment processes, which might, again, change over time. And the need for that land to be tied up in this forever might not be needed. And transferring that unnecessarily doesn't necessarily leave us in the best position to think about future council decisions that they might want to make over time. But again, there's some speculation, I suppose, in that we need councillors to be informed about what those options look like. So thank you for acknowledging that the paper will cover that. Sharon.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I just want to add in just the reminder that whilst the assets, plant or land is transferred to SWL, if it is, these will be consolidated back into the group account, just like Court, and reflected in the same way as SDC is the parent company. We do group reporting, and again that shows the connectivity of SDC and our community continuing to own these assets overall as part of our group reporting.
Thank you, Sharon. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I guess it just leaves open a little bit of a door, and I really liked what you said, that you've got a right of access. So we retain the land and the right of access, because that really makes that quite a clean thing, isn't it? If the land then is no longer used for that purpose, then it's a really easy option for council to then repurpose that. It raises that question then, how do we go forward with those decisions in the future if we've got land that's existing that we currently own or we may procure in the future? Will there be that consideration of Selwyn Water anticipating that they're wanting to buy land, or like those kind of conversations? Will there be a bit of clarity around whether they feel they need to purchase land, or whether council may consider other options of procurement and retaining their right of access point? It kind of opens up a whole new avenue here.
Thanks, Councillor. The decision on whether to the strategic purchase of land to support delivery of water services will sit with Selwyn Water.
So it can sit with water, but it could also, with that option, remain with council, and they just have the access option, or not?
If we're talking about future acquisitions, I think, and again, please, Simon or Mike, feel free to chime in. What we're looking at there would be, you'd be looking at Selwyn Water needs it for Selwyn Water purposes. They will have access to LGF funding. They will be generating the development contributions. They will be generating the funds of which that land would be used to purchase that land. Selwyn purchasing it on their behalf, it then becomes what funds would Selwyn use to purchase that. So I think there becomes more of a pragmatic question on that, and it would, so for that reason, would likely sit with Selwyn Water to make those decisions going forward. If anyone else would like to comment, please.
Yeah, so I think the key point at the moment is the existing use of land for water services that we need to identify and then make the determinations that we've been talking about in order to determine what will be set out in the transfer agreement with effect from the transfer date. Now, that doesn't deal with future arrangements, but Julie's correct in that ultimately that'll be a question for Selwyn Water going forward as to if it identifies a need for access to land that it may not own, it'll either have some statutory rights, or it might come to council and say, we need access to this land we currently don't have access to. There may be an arrangement need to be entered into at that stage.
Cool. Thank you for clarifying that.
So
Mike. Yep.
I might just add one further point here. So in terms of the Selwyn Water as a water service provider, identifying that it needs to acquire land to ensure that it is able to deliver new infrastructure or to service growth in some way, it will have the ability to exercise the Public Works Act provisions as a means of acquiring land by either agreement or through that specific statutory process. But depending on how significant the acquisition is or how strategic it is, they will also, before making those decisions, need to consider their own significance and engagement policy, which will guide their approach to working with affected landowners or other interested parties ahead of going through those processes as well.
Thank you. The final question from me is around access for the new, and I guess this is for you, Mike, thinking about the bill that we've now seen and know, timing of and things with a bit more certainty. There was provision for council to access land for maintenance and other work on the water network. There's all of that is able to be transferred and used by Selwyn Water, or is there a new way of them accessing lands that where easements might not apply, but for the continuation and servicing of community water supplies?
So there is a power to enter land and carry out work. There's a suite of provisions in the legislation that provide for water service providers that power. It might be, I mean, there's a little bit of technical interpretation that needs to be sort of portrayed here. I wonder whether this is something that we can come back and clarify at the 17 September meeting. But the short point is that water service providers initially, on the face of the bill, it wasn't easy to gain access to land where they needed to do critical upgrades or maintenance. It's now been made slightly easier, but the technicalities around that are probably best to come back and speak to briefly at the next meeting.
Cool. Thank you. Two last things. We've got Elizabeth and then Shane.
I'll try and be quick. Area plans, community-led town plans, property developers applications, those kind of conversations, which probably primarily start in council. How will Selwyn Water be all over those so that they are at the forefront of the preparation for their own plans and directions of where they're going to be potentially looking to need to purchase in the future?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. I'll have to come back to you on that one.
And well, I think some of that is captured in the previous conversation where the statement of expectation says that the water entity must adhere to all of our planning and where we're leading with where development should go, that needs to be enabled by the new development. So you provide some further clarity, but I think the intent with that previous conversation that we've had says they follow our lead on it.
I think, just building on that point, Mayor, the development by Selwyn Water of its own development contributions policy is going to be one part of the process which will assist to understand where development is to happen and what developers' aspirations look like. But through the new development levy regime, we're expecting that to work in tandem with existing strategic planning processes, plus also there'll be opportunities to engage with developers as well to ensure that that regime is working to fully capture the aggregate growth costs, which will be incurred by either council through whatever infrastructure it's needing to deliver, community infrastructure, roads, etc., plus also Selwyn Water, because there will be clearly a water-related infrastructure component as well. So I think those conversations will have to happen in order for these new frameworks to be workable in practice.
Thanks, Mike. And Shane.
And just a quick one for me. I just had a thought around the name and how exclusive currently Selwyn Water is if we're seeking partnership potentially wider into the future, and how easily that may change. I mean, Timaru, they don't want to be potentially that. Potentially One Water is an option for a future name. Just a thought.
The name conversation has been, I think Tomotu have suggested some name and some work on that. The decisions around names for Cord and the change there was a company decision working with us as a council and keeping us abreast of what might happen. And I think that naming, and particularly thinking about the partnership around that naming, will again be something that Selwyn Water Limited would lead, but keeping us informed about. Thank you. Great. Was there anything else that staff or those of you online would like to leave with us? We're about to finish and we'll have a break after this piece, so this will close off the water conversation for today's briefing. No, thank you very much. We'll adjourn the meeting and reconvene at 11 a.m. briefing today. The next topic for conversation is the Community Grants End of Year Report. Thank you for the staff that have presenting today and for the report that we've got in our documents. I'll hand over to you to talk us through it.
Kia ora koutou. This report, we apologise that there's no recommendation and that we were confused with the template. So we apologise for that. There's no recommendation on this report. And it's the usual end of year report that we would provide around this topic. And also wanting to highlight that the Strategic Partnership Fund will come to Council at a later date.
So just on that, there is recommendations that sit at the front of this report, but your acknowledgement there is that this is not a decision-making meeting. We're just receiving the information that sits within the report. Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Are you going to talk us through some of the...
Kia ora everyone. So the purpose of this report is to provide a summary of all council administered funding streams for the 24-25 year. And to let Council know about an upcoming report seeking approval to use uncommitted funding to establish a new strategic partnership. The 24-25 financial year marked the first phase of implementing Council's updated community funding approach. This included a revised community grants policy, improving transparency, accountability and alignment across all Council administered funds. I'd like to acknowledge the contributions of staff across the organisation, the voluntary community representatives on the Creative Communities and Sport New Zealand Rural Travel Fund panels, and the Community Funding Assessment Panel, a committee of council, all who have contributed to the funding outcomes highlighted in this report. Happy to take questions.
Cool. Thank you for presenting it, and thanks to those that have been involved in the panel and the decision making over the time as well to support each of the rounds of application. Deborah, you had a question?
Yeah, I did. And I guess it's through the Councillor's Discretionary Fund. And I don't think it's mentioned in here as part of the funding, sorry. And I just wondered, with regards to developing a policy where you've got a changeover from an existing council when you've got 3 months, so it's quite clear the valued amount that currently sits for councillors. We probably need to develop a policy around that, because I don't think there's any policy at the moment surrounding the, currently we have 2,500, and if outgoing councillors was to spend $2,500 in the first 3 months, then the incoming councillor would have absolutely nothing. So I think it's important that a policy be developed around that. And while we're discussing that, I guess it needs to come back. Mr Mayor, through you, what's the current recommendation? What a council, we've got no policy, so what's this current spending arrangement?
So this was discussed 2 months, 2 weeks ago, a month ago. Sharon, you a month ago, you provided that clarity that there was an expectation that it would only, if any money had been spent, it would only be an apportionment of the year that had been, and there was also a request and advice from Sharon on those that are seeking re-election or leaving, that they be considerate, and not spend that money, because there's rules particularly around, or to check the advice from staff before deciding on where that sits. So I think that was reasonably clear.
Okay, so just for clearness, currently we don't have a policy, so the new council coming in should have the full value of $2,500, or should it be apportioned to the current councillors for 3 months at, say, $600?
I would expect that there wouldn't be more than the 3 months of the year's worth of 12 months spent, of the 2,500 spent.
And those that are standing for re-election, they don't have access to it, or they do?
They will still have access to it, because there might be matters that are of need or of support, or other matters that have got nothing to do with the election, where support may have been requested, but that was up to the discretion of each councillor on the advice of staff, as Sharon has already suggested.
And given that Sharon said around the last meeting about cushion with re-electoral office, should there still be a review with regards to what that money is being used for? Is there a dividing line? I'm just trying to clarify what needs to go into the policy or what the understanding is.
And Deborah, that's why I said for those that are running for election, if they want to have expenditure, to come and have a conversation with myself. I think I've articulated a number of times that we are utilising the external resource that we have in terms of the electoral officer to just help us with advice and guidance to make sure that we stay within the boundaries and we advise councillors within the boundaries who are standing again.
Okay, thank you. It's just that I think there needs to be a policy developed going forward around councillors' discretionary fund, especially end of year changeover training. That's fine.
Thanks, Deborah. Bob.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank all the staff, especially because it's been a long way to get such a big change, and I think it's really for the better. I think it's working well. I think probably there's one thing that I would probably look at for a new council is that you have alternates for if people can't turn up, because at some meetings it gets a bit embarrassing when there's two people there and one moves in 1 second, then you take the turnabout. So I think there should be some room, and if somebody's not going to be there, that they actually nominate someone else. So that, but no, it's been great, and I think the amount of interest that we've had in it since this has been going on proves that it's working well. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. I had a query around future reporting and thinking about what's the impact of the money that we're spending on the community. So this is really great because it's clearly what are the dollar values and what's the breadth of the spend and what particular buckets of are available to the community. But I'm kind of interested in and so what. And so I don't know if you've given any thought to what future reporting could look like, but around like how many people are impacted by this, what other funding became available because this funding was available, so that we were multiplying what was actually given, volunteer hours that this has generated, goodwill, and all those sorts of things. Is there any modelling that you're doing in other places that could be used here as well, or is there something that you'd like to pick up in the future, or is this the end of what you imagine future reporting will look like?
Oh yeah, definitely got goals in that direction. In terms of volunteer hours and things like that, we have started asking that in our accountability reports. Because that happened halfway through the year, we don't have accurate numbers. So for this current financial year, when we report on that, we would hopefully be able to provide some more detail of the impact of the funding, not just the dollar amount. So yeah, definitely something we're working towards.
Oh, got lost trying to look for my Heritage Fund page, but I just wanted to ask, so the heritage groups, what I'm hearing back is they've having a low turnout, and they're quite surprised by that, given the amount of requirements for heritage protection and upkeep in the district. Is there, or have you considered the option of doing something in maybe the Selwyn Times or something, just an article or somewhere highlighting what you've already given heritage groups, and then sort of a follow-up where you've got some photos and stuff to just, even Facebook with our comms team, to show what we've done, what the money's been spent on, to try and encourage others, because I know I've met people in the past with personal heritage properties, and a lot of people don't realise that if they own a heritage property individually, they can also apply. That's correct, isn't it? And so it would just open up I think those lines of communication a little bit, so that we're seeing not just a better uptake, but just better awareness for that space.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Lydia.
I just wonder if you want to comment on where the unspent funds go. I noticed that some funds are being carried over, so strategic partnership, youth projects, predator fund. The rest of the leftover funds, where do they go?
My understanding was, and there was a report previously, that it just goes at the end of the financial year. So it doesn't generally get carried over. There were some exceptional circumstances around some of the funds this year that did carry it over, but normally that's the end of the year. The end of the year it finishes.
So there's $140,000 unspent that just goes into general reserves.
General funds.
General funds.
Yeah.
And so I wonder whether with this, part of me thinks that there needs to be another piece of work at looking at rolling over those funds, because we've collected the money we've allocated it for that purpose. It's just part of my thinking through that.
So there is a plan to bring a revised community grants policy in the new calendar year, and that would be a really good opportunity for some thinking and a proposal around that in terms of what would be the criteria, for rolling it over, and I guess reviewing the allocation accordingly.
And I don't know whether this is appropriate to ask here, but it's noting that wanting to utilise the Strategic Partnership Fund for a partnership to do with our Ageing Well strategy. And then I note in our annual plan, it says that we have $115,000 allocated for that already. And so I guess I understand that we're talking about a future report that will be coming to council through yourself, Sharon. But I guess since it's mentioned here, I was just wanting to understand a little bit more.
I'm happy to start that and then hand over to Stephanie. My understanding is that in the original, the decision around strategic grant partners sits solely with council. A recommendation goes via the assessment panel, but it always comes to council for decision. And we have worked to anchor it to some key strategic priorities of the council. And on my recall, I can remember there was some environmental strategic partners, and there was one or two other strategic partners, and there was a gap. And so this isn't about council's spend, this is about partners spending money that there might be, should council not invest in that, there might be an expectation that council should be investing in that, and that we identified that there were some gaps in the strategic partners in terms of covering all of those areas. But Stephanie, can you check that that's correct, but also speak around what did get funded in that Strategic Partnerships Fund?
So currently we have strategic partners aligning with the biodiversity strategy, Piki Amakura, and the biocultural strategy, with the two runanga being supported. So there is an opportunity with some of those funds that are being reduced. There's budget available in that funding opportunity. So the gap we see is with aligning with Te Paepae.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just, thank you, Stephanie. I think I was just going to say that ultimately it's council's decision as to where that funding goes to, and the team are just highlighting where the opportunities are with regards to the strategic relationship. And I'm not sure when you're intending to bring the report through via the CE's report.
Hopefully in September. Yeah.
So this council will get to make that decision.
Thank you. Shane.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for the work. I would support the establishment of a annual end of year type of report that gets sent out, I guess, with the stories behind it, and I think that's already been brought up. I think that's a great opportunity to tell the story to the community, or the wider community. I'm a little bit confused. We've just spoken about the unallocated funds being redistributed, but then point B, is that an example of what we were just talking about here? 15 of unallocated budget from that fund to move to the other one. And whilst I think it's a good opportunity, especially for our seniors within our communities, to be more supported, and if that goes towards that, I think that's a good goal, a good aspiration. But I'm just a little bit unsure as to how that fits into the previous conversation. But I just wanted to ask about the Ellesmere Reserve Board here on page 66.4. Has the communication gone back to the board? And just a little bit of feedback from our previous conversations about the board. The board has obviously been in touch with the CEO and with me, and there was some comments that were made at the time that were quite hurtful to the board. And whilst I believe that there's been some communications around that, I just wanted to ask how the communication is at the moment. Have they been informed? Are they aware? And what has been their feedback?
Stephanie, I'll get you to speak specifically to the communication with those recipients of that funding previous, and I'll respond in regards to the communication, because that came via the Chief Executive and myself more directly.
So in terms of the budgets, so the no rollover, so that's for each financial year. So in terms of the strategic partnerships, the budget that's available is for the 25-26 year and 26-27. So we're still working on that. That's what the report will be for.
Right.
In terms of Ellesmere reserves, we've sent initial communications and haven't sent any formal communications as yet. So that's in draft at the moment.
Okay. Will that come in on the 17th, will it? Or what's the intention there to follow up?
I'm not sure that we were driving for it to be around the 17th.
Okay.
There's just some practicalities that are being worked through in terms of how that is communicated.
Okay.
But if I just use the opportunity, there has been some dialogue around, I guess it would be fair to say that a previous member of that board felt that there wasn't appropriate level of acknowledgement of the importance of the role, and there was just some dialogue back and forth about the accuracy of certain statements. We certainly apologised on behalf of Council for any confusion or hurt that was caused, and clarified what the points were that were being made in the communication. And I felt reasonably comfortable that it was settled, that there wasn't any ongoing communication. And I don't know whether or not, Sharon, you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no further communication.
Sophie.
Yeah, more than anything else, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Stephanie and her team, because, well, sometimes we have some really interesting meetings with a few conundrums, and we came up with certain guidelines along, and assess them along the way to try and make things clearer for applicants and also for us as panel and staff who are caught between both. So it is quite interesting. I mean, the Individuals and Teams Fund, particularly trying to work out how to standardise some of those grants to avoid us being over allocated by halfway through the year, for instance, that sort of thing. And some of them are under allocated, and I guess some of that, for instance, with the Creative Communities or Rural Travel Fund, there's somebody else sets the criteria for that. As well, and it's not even our money. So I presume that money, if that's not used, that goes back to those entities, or does it come back? Does it stay with us?
So Creative NZ and Sport NZ agree that we can carry those over. So those are funds that can be carried over into the next financial year.
That's always good. So if we get a sudden influx next year, then we've got some extra. That's always good. And I just wanted to note for anybody who hadn't read the footnotes, the Predator-Free Fund, because of setting it up, it looks like it's unallocated, but that money got carried forward into this year's one. So we've ended up with more money that has been allocated now. So the report will look different. So that's not just 50 grand suddenly going back into a pot because nobody applied. Yeah. It was the way that setting it up, basically it was brand new and it wasn't quite as clear as it should have been to start with. So that's not been used. And similarly, kind of strategic events. I mean, we allocated some money to a group that then decided actually we're going to go to Christchurch, we're not going to go to Selwyn at all, which is a bit of a shame, but so that money came back there. Yeah. But yeah, thank you very much for all your work.
Great. Thank you for presenting that to us. So this will be included in your report, Sharon.
Yeah, in September.
September. Great. Thank you. The next item is document 3, delegation of authority, and Jodie's presenting.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. This paper is to give you a refresher on a paper that we provided, or a briefing we provided earlier in the year. It's been some time since we had a conversation with you around delegations of authority, and we do plan to bring the delegation schedules for you to council on the 17th of September. So there's nothing fundamentally new in this briefing to what you received earlier in the year. It's simply a reminder of what council can expect to receive in terms of the format of the schedules and also the resolutions that council will be asked to make on the 17th. One thing that I would like to flag to you, just to give you an idea of the type of changes and amendments that have been made following the review of the schedules, is one of the examples is going to be around leasing. We have identified that there have been some redrafting or drafting improvements that could be made to some of those delegations, which removes some of the ambiguity that the team is currently facing in that space. And this is essentially making sure that we're really clear on what types of leasing we are covering by the delegations, things like leasing from council and then to council. So, yeah. So I think the key point that we're just kind of flagging here is this is the non-financial delegation review. It's the second set after the financial delegation review. As we've been working through with the teams, of course, we did the financial. This was never going to be a one and done. It was a continuous improvement regime. We've identified that the leasing hadn't come down from council. So to give you kind of an example of some innocuous things. So if we wanted to enter into a brand new 2-week lease for a premises for $2,000, the delegations currently say that must come to the Finance and Performance Committee. So just bringing some things that hadn't been caught in the financial delegations and back to practical. So it's majority non-financial and just a tidy up on some of the financial stuff.
Cool. Thank you for bringing that. And again, this is information that is coming to a future council meeting for a decision. Are there any questions on this heads up that we've got today and the papers that have been presented? Deborah.
Thank you. Sorry if you were wondering what I was doing. I was just refreshing myself with Canterbury University and more Massey University with regards to the monitoring of the delegation holders. And I'll read Massey University's out. Delegation holders are subject and supervision of their are at the supervision of their managers, whom in turn are acceptable to the Vice Chancellor. In this case, it'll be the CEO, through lines of accountability. So it also recognises that these delegations are actually delegated by the board, and there has to be a responsibility to monitor that delegation. Now, what I'm struggling to find in reading this report is how are the delegations going to be monitored by the board? For example, normally you'd have policies. The policies would have a review date, and it's up to the manager or the CEO to make sure that those policies are actually brought to the governors to actually review by the review policy date to see if they are still valid. And So that's the policy basically around the delegations itself. And I just think that what I'm reading here, we've got both. We've got financial delegations and we've got non-financial delegations. It comes back to the fact that it's the board or the council who are giving the delegation. And when you give a delegation, good governance is the responsibility to monitor effectively the delegation. Policies normally have a review date that should be brought to the council for review. So should delegations, or some sort of reporting to make sure that that delegation doesn't need to be altered, tweaked, reevaluated or readjusted, which is the responsibility of the board to choose if they want to. So I'm just highlighting the fact that we do need to understand that delegations aren't set in concrete. They have to be reported to the board, and the board have the responsibility that if they're not fit for purpose, then they should be reviewed. And those delegations go back down through the chain. And I think that there needs to be a process in here that is quite clear, the line of reporting back to the board or the council. And I'd like to see that happen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. I think I'd just take us back to this piece of work that the team have talked to, where we've been, I think the best way to say is with councillors, we've developed a framework over the last year and a half to revamp how policies are managed, how they are monitored, how they are checked, and the same for delegation. So with council support, we've been putting and I say councillor support, we've been putting a very clear framework in place, and Deborah, you've been really supportive of that because that's something that you have been asking for years. And I think we've captured and encapsulated all of that in some of the frameworks that we presented 12 months ago. And what the team are bringing back is this is part of the CEO's KPIs, and councillors put this over a multi-year because you recognised what a large job this is. So I think it's just reminding that the framework that councillors endorsed is in place, and the team are bringing that back, which means then that part of that framework was around when policies would be coming back. And so I think we're already there. So I'm not sure what else that you are looking for, because we've encapsulated that into all the previous conversations and requests that you've made.
Yeah. Can I?
Yeah.
Thank you. And I really, really appreciate the work that's happened, right? But may I remind how we got into the situation in the first place, where we had an absolute lack of reporting, understanding, with regards to not having appropriate policies updated and put in place. And no offence to you as the CEO, I actually want to congratulate you and the staff for actually doing something and putting it back together to meet a high growth council. Really appreciate that. But if I go to 7 and I actually look at the risks that were actually highlighted in the report, and I guess my concern is that we could easily, with those risks, fall into a situation where we're going to have a brand new council, at least 8 new councillors sitting around this table. A lot of them may not have any governance experience. I guess for me, it's very important that they have an understanding of how the policy and the delegations are going to fit together when they are elected, so they are fully informed, what they are, what they're in place, we're putting them in place, what their mechanism and responsibility is as a board to actually review from a governance perspective. And I just highlight the risks, and I just want to make it quite clear that we need to actually be fair to those that are coming on board and have a clear process for them to understand. We may know what's being talked about, but it's important that they understand how those policies are put together, what the delegations are, and what the review mechanisms are for them.
Thanks, Deborah. And Sharon has already shared with everyone that there's a very extensive orientation set up for the new councillors, which goes includes this, but goes well beyond what this is going to will encompass for anyone new that's coming in. But your particular questions around the risks, and I wonder, Julie, whether you could just talk around the mitigation for the risks that you've identified in here to ensure that you've seen what could go wrong, and what have you put in place to make sure that the situation Deborah's raised is history rather than our future.
Yep. So what I can give assurance of is when the delegation policy will come on the 17th of September for the decision report. That has an annual review date back to council, so that policy will come back every year, assuming it's passed in September. We'll come back every year in September, and we can bring this. What we will be bringing to you is the CEO and ELT schedules, noting that the framework that's been put in place has been delegation to the CE and then CE delegates below. And what the visibility we've been traditionally giving to council is that CE ELT level, so that would be expected to come back annually in September to each council.
Sorry, Deborah, do I have to come back to you? It's Elizabeth.
Can
if you want to
finish?
turn it off.
Yeah, I'm happy for Deborah to can.
Okay. Yeah, Karen, Deborah.
So just with regards to coming back, will it come back to audit and risk, or will it come back to the full board, full council?
It's a council policy, so it will do both. We generally take it through audit and risk to get their perspective and their feedback, and then we bring it back to full council.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, look, I'm just going to be the negative person in the room, but the reality is, under the delegations, I just feel like I'm not really strong on understanding what is being delegated, whether it's financial or non-financial. I feel like it's a grey area. And if a constituent came to me and said, why was this money spent in this particular area, and it's a decision that hasn't come to full council, then I would be presumptuous in expecting it was part of the delegated responsibility of someone else to make that decision. And I feel like that's why sometimes I'm finding out about certain financial decisions that are made that turn up in the Selwyn Times I had no knowledge of. For me, it feels like I'm agreeing to something and signing over, as Deborah said, having things come the backstop coming back to council, and I feel like we are losing that ability to be a backstop a wee bit, and it concerns me. And I guess I'd like a little more clarity on what the reporting is, how often that reporting is for council, so we understand what's been delegated in those decisions rather than finding out in the Selwyn Times.
What I can bring back as not for the decision, but I can bring it for information attached to the report, what was approved for the financial delegations previously in the first phase as well, to bring that for information to council. At a very high level, what was approved was full delegation for financial to the CE, subject to some retained areas by council. So we'll bring those schedules back so that information is top of mind as well.
Thank you. Grant.
What reporting should we expect to see when there's an incidence of operating outside delegations?
We send the reporting to the CE, and then we work with the CE for reporting back through the Mayor and Council.
Because at the nub of the matter, I think that's the concern. I mean, if you boil it down, it's the governance group really concerned about what happens. I've got a specific example that I've raised before about operating outside delegation, and what were the consequences, or the rationale, or for want of a better word, how was that resolved? And I think the fear I'm hearing from us as a group is that messaging may not get to this table. And so what's the mechanism that you can give me assurance that when someone operates outside a delegation, that it does transparently get to this table and it's brought to our attention and we're able to deal with that?
Happy to take an action to work with the CE and Mayor and report back on what that would look like going forward.
I think that because there's different levels of what the request looks like, and lots of the delegations sit underneath you as the CE, and our employment matters with the person. Our responsibility as an employee of Sharon, the delegations giving to her directly, and our decisions made within the organisation in line with the delegations that have been given to our chief executive. So, there'll need to be some discussion around what level of interrogation you're wanting to give to.
That's the nature of local government, though, isn't it? There's fine levels of judgment required. Some areas are grey, and there are that is. There's no denying that areas are grey. And if you used Elizabeth's example of, for instance, the Lincoln University situation, where it was delegated down and that was delivered, and you sort of say, well, contextually, dollar-wise, it wasn't a big dollar value, but probably from a perspective of governance interest or community interest in the outcomes, it was quite high. So dollar value low, but outcomes potentially high. So that's where judgment's required as to what possibly comes back.
Yeah, I think that's right. And thinking about the no surprises, there's other ways in which things get raised with governance that aren't because the delegations aren't in place for them to proceed, but that we operate a transparent business with, accountability to the chief executive, and Sharon, you've been really good at bringing things to us, regardless of whether they needed to be or not. Grant, I hear you on that grey piece and the need to understand where that sits, but I think the expectation is that, and Sharon, I hope you've heard this, that we would expect things that are going to be of interest to the community to also be raised with us, that we don't hear about it first from either the media or someone at Foursquare.
Yeah, no, I've heard that loud and clear. Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'm just on track with what Grant was saying about the dollar value. Most organisations, like your delegations, are up to $1 million. It's a substantial amount of money, and I guess any company that was working under that sort of thing, there would be a higher level of expectancy for that to be brought back to council. That kind of money is significant, and even though, as Grant pointed out, it was a lower amount, the Lincoln University amount, but it would be good to know that we do have a policy around the reporting, and even if it's just conceptually, we get an indication of how and where money's tracking and the kind of decisions we're making. I think it's really important that council has a bigger overview of some of these things, and we've done that, and as far as I can see, we've done that in the past, but we don't know what we don't know. And it's very hard for us here to make that decision when we're at that top of the level of what's happening in the workings underneath, when you lift up the blankets or under the carpet, so to speak. I think that needs to be a part of what comes back on the 17th, because I'm not going to be comfortable signing off anything on delegations if I don't feel that there's a huge level of transparency available to the council.
So we're now no longer talking about what the report is that's in front of us today. Financial delegations that have been approved by this council to the chief executive require that money can only be spent when it has been approved by an annual plan or a long-term plan. That the idea that there's this money sitting around that Sharon, her own whim, can just choose to spend is not what this council has approved, and not what the policy suggests is ever able to happen. And Sharon works by that. And so to have a reminder in the future report about what the decisions that we have made is good, but the report coming back on the 17th is not a financial delegations report. It's the content that's in today's drafting paper. So the transparency in reporting, I'm hearing from councillors, is the thing that you're keen to be aware of and know, and we should expect that. That is good practice. But we're not looking to review the financial delegations.
Okay, so the non-financial delegations, can you just give me a bit of a heads up as to what kind of examples those sort of things would be then, so I'm a bit clearer on this?
I'll start and then I might hand over to Jodie if I don't sufficiently detail. So there are things like the ability to grant a warrant to a building compliance officer who is a new employee of council. They are things like subject to the financial delegations, you can put, if you have the delegation to sign a contract, you can put your signature on it if you had the delegation to approve that contract. Would you like to give any other key examples, Jodie?
Those are quite good examples. Other than the leasing examples that we've already talked about in terms of the difference between leasing from council to council, I think it's probably sufficient, unless there are any specific examples at council.
So powers under bylaws, for example, might be another one that comes through.
Great. Thank you for providing that clarity. Is there any further questions or things people would like information included in the report for the further meeting? Nope. Appreciate your time. The next matter is the Mayoral Forum triennial agreement. That's brought here because the Mayoral Forum has sought feedback from existing councils, as this will be something that is discussed by the next councils. This is a document that was agreed to at the beginning of this triennium, and there might be changes and updates that you see as necessary or would like the Mayoral Forum to consider including in the future document. One of the key things around the change proposed is thinking about reporting. Again, continuation of the previous conversation. So on Friday at the Mayoral Forum we've just had, talking about holding regular webinars post meetings so that all councillors from across Canterbury can all have the same information, and then it's not just waiting on the timing of a meeting or on what ends up making it onto a report, or waiting for a particular question to be asked. And I think that would be a good improvement for us to make. I don't know how that gets included in this particular piece, but there's an intention from the Secretariat to follow through on some of that. You'll notice in the paper in the agreement, this is about Canterbury working together, and all of those conversations sometimes mean that there's differences of opinion across Canterbury, but we try and work together on the stuff that we can come together and advocate for. Particularly, a lot of the Mayoral Forum's work is about advocacy to central government for Canterbury's fair share of government spending. And a particular example of that is the roading funding, which Canterbury is woefully short of. Every other region in the country receives its vehicle kilometres travelled percentage. If Canterbury was receiving its vehicles kilometres travelled percentage, it would receive 3 times the amount of funding that it currently receives. We currently get 5% of the national fund, when our vehicle kilometres travelled is somewhere between 13 and 15% of the national travel. So the other areas that we have been working on that this anticipates is thinking about how, so transport's one, housing's the other, and energy. And Sharon, you've been a key leader in the energy space. Some of you as councillors have also been involved in some of the work that I guess ECAN has hosted on behalf of Canterbury councils around biodiversity and climate change, which has been important as well. Another part of the conversation has been about mana whenua contribution and engagement with the Mayoral Forum, and at the moment value any feedback that you'd have on that as well. Happy to talk this through and have any questions or particularly issues that you want raised about this is really thinking about the next 3 years. What would you like included in this triennial agreement? Elizabeth.
Yeah, I haven't thought about this latter part that you've just said there, what we'd like included, but I just wanted to get some clarification of 5% in transport coming back from the kilometres covered. When you say that we'd receive that, can you just give me clarify for me what you mean by we receive that and what that would be allocated to be spent on for roading?
Yeah, so the National Land Transport Fund allocates money to projects across the country. When you look at the data by region, every region receives about, plus or minus 1% of its vehicle kilometres travelled. So the actual road use, it gets that money back, other than Canterbury. I think Auckland is sitting. So that includes money that they will co-invest with us around local projects that have 51% FAR rating, and also all of the state highway projects, which are fully funded from the National Fund. it could include both, but we wouldn't know until the government chose to spend that extra 10%. Yeah, the scope includes both. Yep. Deborah?
Thank you. Wow, 30 years, in the last 20, and I finally get to make a comment without having it put in front of me on inauguration day and saying, please sign this. I'm going to have my 10 cents worth about this. Sure, under section 15 of the Local Government Act, it requires authorities within a regional area to enter into a triennial agreement by the 1st of March. It also requires communication and reporting. And I guess that communication shouldn't be, please go and find it on a website. There should be regular updates by who's ever sitting at those meetings back to the governance boards. Especially when you're looking at section 16 and we've got regional deals turning up. Who makes the decisions on the regional deals? Is it going to be the Canterbury Mayoral Forum? Is it going to be in conjunction with local council laws? What delegations is actually being given away by this broad statement that we actually have with regards to the triennial agreement? To me, this agreement is a very, very important statement in the Local Government Act, covering both sections 15 and 16 and managed through the regional. And for all of you who are there, I would like to see put into this document regular substantial reporting coming back after every meeting to the respective council laws, so that there are decisions that can not be made because we've heard that it's not a governing body to make decisions. Any decisions that are included are brought back to the governance board for their information, knowledge, even for projects that are agreed at the regional level. There should be some transparency and accountability coming back to each council's governance boards to know what money is being spent, similar to what we have in a long-term plan. Because what can be agreed through the regional council, through the Mayoral Forum, will turn up as a funding mechanism in your long-term plan. So for me, this is just another rollover, and a rollover, and a rollover, and this rollover's got to stop. There needs to be some accountability and transparency in reporting what is undertaken by the Mayoral Forum and the chair of the Regional Council back to the respective governance board. It could be just a paper in the agenda, but it needs to be reported back. And that's especially given, what does it mean? Delegation for regional deals. What delegations are you actually giving away as a council to the Mayoral Forum to make on your behalf as a board? Please tell me, with the clauses 15 and 16, where that process can happen. I read into it that it can happen, but it has to be in the triennial agreement. And if I remember rightly, did this triennial agreement come with some form of constitution when it was first enacted, or was that changed in 2014 with regards to the amendment to the Local Government Act? And then we have the Canterbury Local Authorities Triennial Agreement. Then underneath that, we also have the Chief Executive's reporting to the local government. And the thing that amazes me is that only the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor, or if you're tapped in the shoulder to be delegated, can actually attend these meetings. Now, that to me is not a transparent process. I'm not aware that they are on YouTube to be monitored or to be evaluated, like council meetings, and I think they should be. And I definitely think the reporting needs to come back to the governance board, even if it's just for information, because as councillors, you cannot attend under the current mechanism. It's even in here, you are locked out of receiving process. And I've waited since 2001 to be able to say what I'm saying here. So, for me, I would like some reporting put in here, some transparency and accountability back to the respective council that is not included in here. Sorry, I've got it marked. And while there are some leniencies, like you cannot stop a council from talking about reform if they wish to choose reform, but I'm just going to say it bluntly. When you've got a mayoral forum and you've got chief executives and you've got the ELT team all involved in reporting through this particular process, sarcastically, what do you need councillors for? What's our role? What's left? What is left? So I just want a transparent process. The Canterbury Mayoral Forum will continue to provide governance of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, develop and lead implementation of sustainable development strategy for the Canterbury region for the local government triennium of 2026 and 28. And it will advocate for the interests of the region, its council and its community. Well, if you don't have reporting back, where's the input coming from? The Canterbury Mayoral Forum is to be supported by Canterbury Chief Executives Forum and other regional forums and working groups as agreed to time to time. Well, that's a pretty broad statement to come back and not necessarily report back, especially when we're looking at regional deals. Agreement to review. A triennial agreement may be varied by agreement between all the local authorities within the region.
Deborah, we've all read the document.
I know,
If you'd
but
like
I'm
to
saying,
provide anything that's going to be
I'm just
helpful
saying
to the review.
that an individual council should have the opportunity to actually have input into some sort of reporting back on a regular basis for transparency and accountability in this document.
Okay,
and it's
thank
not
you.
there.
Yep, and that's the sort of feedback that we're requesting now. Thank you for, you've just said you've waited till your final meeting to share it. If it's been available since 2001, then you've had at least 7 starts to the triennium to also raise these matters, because this is brought before councils every time. So the reason for having this conversation now is to look for improvement. And I hear the things that you're saying, and that's why we've brought this paper for discussion today. There's no delegation for regional deals, so that was one of the matters that you raised that's not in this agreement. And that was part of, or it'll be part of a future update, Sharon, to the council on that. But that's not included in here. So that might be one of the things that you want to ask the new council to consider. What part should regional deals, given that's going to be a continuation of what the government wants, should this entail? And particularly around reporting, maybe what I'm hearing from you is you'd like a paragraph that includes some reporting expectations. So let's talk about what those should be and include them so that the next Mayoral Forum understands the views of the council. So thank you for sharing that.
Section 3, Principles E.
Thank you.
Where you'd start by having a process of giving that.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, in a slightly similar but slightly different vein, I think some of the benefits of LGNZ are widely recognised, where we bring in experts and subject matter experts, but sometimes they're quite brief. It's like you've got a continuum of a whole lot of speakers, and they've got a short period of time to give you a brief overview on some really important topics. I'm wondering whether something could be proposed to the Mayoral Forum when we have really massive topics like what we've had in the last 3 years that come to council, and you guys are getting to work through some of that stuff, whether there's the potential to run a session for those local councils to get together in the same vein that we do with LGNZ, but I have an all-day approach where we have workshops and so that all the councils can be receiving important information by qualified experts on and be able to raise concerns in that environment. So it's much more fulsome than what we do in LGNZ, but tackling deep diving into some of those things. That's something that I'd like to have proposed to them, and I think that would be a cost sharing exercise because it's not one council paying for all of that, and it could be done very cost effectively. And I think that I'd really appreciate those kind of opportunities.
Yep, thanks, Elizabeth. I think that's a good idea. We'll feed that back. Deborah, did you have something else?
Oh, sorry, just in case you wanted a section. It's section 3, principles E. Keep the local community informed about its activities by proactively releasing information about key projects in a timely manner as agreed by member councils.
Yeah, and that happens every couple of weeks after a Mayoral Forum. Yep. Megan.
Yes, kia ora. I just have 2 questions. So the first is just generally about the value. Like, how do you see this from your experience of engaging with it? What's the real value here of having the Mayoral Forum? And then my second question is, it does talk about having the meeting with the Papatipu Rūnaka at least annually. And I wanted to know, are there other mechanisms for engagement and how does that work? Because it seems like a really powerful regional tool, and I'd like to understand how mana whenua get to be involved.
Cool. The first piece of value is, I think, for the region, particularly advocating to government about these are the things that we need. So the policing matter, which was raised here, that was something that was raised at the Mayoral Forum, and there's a group thinking about how we approach that with the minister, but also with local leadership. When it comes to submissions on legislation, there's work that sometimes it's not the national LGNZ response doesn't actually cut what Canterbury needs, and sometimes there's differences between councils as to what they would like to have as well. But having a Canterbury voice into those things, I think really matters and speaks up for our region. So that's probably the key piece of value out of it, as well as the connecting with other mayors. It's a little bit like Elizabeth said around the broader connection and understanding, learning together, I think is important. The second piece around working with mana whenua, there's been a range of different ways to approach that, and some of that was having joint meetings together with everyone invited. There wasn't always a great turnout to those, and so we weren't sure, actually, maybe that structure isn't quite the right way to do it. Nigel is the current chair, and he has sort of assumed responsibility for some of those key contacts as the chair of that group, and recognising that actually locally is councils, we each have our own relationships with mana whenua, and that can be different. So I don't know what the future is going to look like. I don't think it is necessarily the structure that sits there, but would be open to hearing if you've got any views, or Tamutu does, on how you think that regional engagement needs to be. And this has come up. I mean, regional deals was talked about before. If we think about regional deals, it needs to be a partnership approach between councils, ruranga, businesses, all sorts that fits into that. And at the moment, I don't feel like there's a mechanism for Canterbury conversations at that level. Sophie.
Yeah, I just wanted to support Deborah, to be honest, because honestly, most of the reporting back to this council is via your diary and a mayor's report. And if we want to ask any questions, then we have to ask you the questions. But if we don't know what's been spoken about, we don't know what questions to ask. The newsletter that they produce after the event is some weeks afterwards. after minutes have been signed off. So there's no point in asking questions by then, and you literally have to voluntarily sign up to the newsletter yourself. There's not even in our resource centre, we don't get to see what it is that's coming up for you guys. And it's not just the mayoral forum. I mean, there's other committees that could be useful to have some sort of official reporting back space, a bit like what we've done with the subcommittees the last few months, which would, and personally I would find that, I mean, I love having all the information, everybody knows that, or as much as is reasonable. But I do feel like there's times where we've let stuff like that slip, and I can see that some councils do that in a far more informative way. And I think that whoever the mayor is next time would be good to set a bit more of that information and sharing and space on agendas so that that can be discussed. Because otherwise you can get a wee bit blindsided by work that has progressed. By the time it comes to having a decision made, actually effectively the monies that have been invested and the decision is 90% there already. So, thanks.
Cool. And do you think that should be included then in like a quarterly, like as the meetings happen, on a council agenda? Would you like that? And do you think in a briefing sense that's right? Might be a better space. Like there's an update, but it's not necessarily decisions. Kind of, it depends on the types of papers, I suppose, that a future council wants to have at its council meetings. But that level of detail and conversation is what you're requesting. Yeah, cool. Okay, thanks. Lydia.
Yeah, it was. I'll touch on a little bit of the things, but I think that there is real benefit in inclusion of other elected members in the conversation about what is happening. Even though the mayor is the leader of the organisation, the connection that we have with other councils and elected members, I think, is very important for us on a bigger page. And it was just around the reporting, and I think having the reporting back to council, I think, is really important about what is happening, but it's actually, to me, it's a bigger picture than just the mayoral forum and the chairs of committees. Actually, there are portfolios and committees that we sit on outside of here that really I see should have at some point reporting coming back to us around what we're doing. Because otherwise there is no reporting back on any of this stuff. It is just, making decisions in those committees without reporting back to us as a group. And so, yeah, I think that there's definitely a better space to report back on what is happening outside of this room as well.
Cool, thanks, Lydia. Yeah, we'll take that on board and think about the breadth that needs to be included. I used to email all of the agendas ahead of time when I received them about a week before the meeting to all councillors. I received no feedback on any of those agendas before I attended the meetings. So I haven't done that for the last couple of years because I just received no feedback on it. So I thought, well, if it's not of value, I won't continue the practice. But what I'm hearing today is you actually appreciated that, and that is worth continuing. But it's not only before the meeting; it's also the follow-up. It's both sides of the meeting. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Shane.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same, Sam. To your defence, I've never felt excluded from any information or asking for my input. I think I've attended one around transport. I think it was a couple of years ago that you included me in on when I asked to be involved. So, to your defence, I think that the information is readily available. It's how often you make yourself ask for that information and to be involved.
Cool, thank you. Well, I appreciate all the feedback that everyone's given on ways that we can improve this into the next term. There's been notes taken from today's discussion, so we'll feed that back to the Secretariat to include in the next triennial agreement. That takes us to 12:06. I think we'll just break and then we'll do the